Welcome back to another edition of Between Two FARS. I'm Warneke Miller here once again with Robert Tepfer, and we've been discussing contract types in this series. And today we'd like to sort of do a wrap-up of some miscellaneous contract types and issues and give you some important caveats to think about when you're determining or when you're advising your contracting officer on their determination of contract type. The first thing we're going to talk about today, Bob, is options, which is a type of variable quantity contract, right?
Well, I would say that options, one of the things I had an attorney not long ago refer to it as it's a type of contract, and it's not. It is effectively a continuing option or offer rather. It's held open on a already existing contract, and the government can unilaterally, that's important, elect to exercise the option by accepting the offer. Now, the key with regard to that is, remember, with an option, or rather an offer, you have to accept it exactly as it's written. So, it has to be unequivocal and it has to be a mirror image of what was offered. Now, where the biggest headaches show up, or a few of them actually, is the exercise of the option requires a exercise pursuant to 17207. You have to have the funding available, and it has to be most advantageous to the government. I'm just going over a few of these considerations. And one of the things that it specifically sets out is it says past performance evaluations and other actions have been considered. Okay, tell you a war story on that. And the war story is, imagine if you have really no choice but to exercise an option. You get to that point, and then like 2 or 3 months in, performance is so bad it even deteriorates further than it already was, and you elect to default terminate. The problem you have is you have the CO having theoretically considered performance, and you also have them making a determination that performance was satisfactory, which is totally inconsistent with the decision to default terminate. So the case that I had, you had to explain you really had no choice. The performance had even deteriorated further. But the fact of the matter is it needs to be considered. Similarly, you have to do an evaluation of price cost and examine that to make certain that you really haven't done anything inconsistent. Sometimes markets change. And if they do, and you've exercised the option, that's not a very good thing, and theoretically you might even get a protest from a contractor out there that could say you had no business exercising that option in light of what the market now is, and your DNF is wrong. So those are important considerations. Those are the most important ones. Continuity of operations is critical, and I would want to stress that, particularly if you get a performance issue and you have to turn to a judge, and state that, look, this is why we did it. It makes a big difference. Also, theoretically, if the market had changed a little bit, because it could be very disruptive, you might have to do all sorts of administrative costs. And let's face it, these contracts that we create, we don't create them overnight with regard to a recompetition. Those are the outstanding issues on 17207 that I would highlight to you.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about a cost plus percentage of cost contract. What can you tell us about that, and do you have any warnings?
Okay, well, cost plus percentage of cost contracts are statutorily prohibited, and it flows into the FAR, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's a very common sense type approach, and nobody would, I would think, would embrace a cost plus percentage of cost contract. The problem you have is that the scenario can inadvertently sneak into your contract and you're unaware of its operations until you get there, and it may be several months in, and then you have a major problem.
Can you give us some examples of what that might look like so that the contracting officers and attorneys can have their radar up to look for those situations?
Okay, let's say in one instance that I had a long time ago there was a store that was operated, and the government, under the store arrangement on an Air Force base, agreed to pay the cost of items plus a percentage of the cost. And the nature of that was that it made sense, it seemed, because the items had never increased in several years. So everybody at the time thought, what's the big deal? You know, maybe if it goes down, we'll get a break. Well, items went up, and by definition, at the inception of the contract, it was statutorily prohibited. But this was just one little plan in the contract over to the side, but it was in violation of statute.
And so you want to just make sure that there's nothing hidden anywhere in any of your CLINs or statements of work that talk about percentage of price being a fee or an award or some sort of additional payment to the contractor?
It gives it, what it does is gives the contractor an incentive to increase cost, and it costs us in cost, and it costs us in fee. And it's it makes good sense. The problem is it may be buried in a line on it somewhere.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about award term contracts. What's the definition of an award term contract?
Okay, you see a lot of these that occur when you say, if a contractor's doing a great job, why don't we just let him continue on? And the Air Force kind of went with this program, and a lot of times they'll get permission to go past 5 years. And the theory, at least, is that good performance results in more work, which makes good sense. It saves us time and money for a recompetition and gives the contractor that's performing well more time. On its face, it looks really good.
Well, what does it really function? How does it function, Bob?
Well, here's the problem. The problem is that once you get past a certain point and you now are evaluating performance, and that performance sometimes is the qualitative item, or it can be the cost, you end up with problems in that the government is effectively given up discretion. The issue becomes, if they pass that gate, the government has no choice. The contractor gets the additional work. And so you end up with a lot of times with perhaps it's got a cost gate in there that they have to keep cost under a certain amount or a certain target or whatever. That can get questionable. And I've seen headaches where it shows up later that they pay in provisional rates, and then subsequently the costs go above it, but they don't find that out for 9 months to a year later. Or the qualitative
or a contract closeout.
Yes, and you've given them the work, and you've got a real headache on your hands because they got the additional work as a reward, and there's a solid argument that they're also entitled to the cost, which you thought they had kept under, but they didn't, because it's a cost contract. You get all allowable, reasonable costs. So you've got this inconsistency here, which you, the government, kind of bought into. And another thing is, I'm not certain a lot of folks fully appreciate what they've got, because you hear people say, well, then we have the award term option. And it is anything but an option. Remember, I said an option is at the unilateral discretion of the government. This is not.
No, an award term almost functions more like an entitlement, it seems like.
It is. It is absolutely an entitlement. Once they satisfy the prerequisites, it's their work. And guess what? If you elect to, terminate for convenience, that's what you've done. I mean, you can't just say we're not going any further, and you're entitled to have, as a contractor, to a termination settlement proposal. That was your contract, that was your work, and now what are the costs? Good argument can be made. It even goes into the area where you did all the excellent work, not to mention the impact on the area that you were working in, or could have had, should have had, arguably, at that time. So, and here's the other thing. Let's say that the government scrutinized costs, scrutinized quality, and says, okay, there's an entitlement under the contract, under the award term feature, okay? And an outside third-party contractor said, wrong. You doctored the cost. We don't believe that you calculated them accurately. An argument could be made that the quality is not everything that was a prerequisite to getting it. Guess what? They can protest under SECA, saying, wait a minute, that should have been a competed requirement, and you simply gave it to them.
Yeah,
you don't
just
have
sort of
that
like
issue with
favoring the
options.
incumbent or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, they were not entitled because the conditions preceding were not satisfied.
So needless to say, you've experienced some complications with the use of award term contracting.
Yes, absolutely illegal contract, completely. It's
Yes.
just you have to understand the risk that you embrace when you go along those lines. And anybody who refers to it as an award term option, in my opinion, they either don't understand or they're emphasizing the wrong thing. It is not an option from the government's perspective.
All right, well, there you have it. Bob has no love for award term.
I certainly don't. and remember, the biggest headache is, go ahead if there's prerequisite cost determination, and then you end up later with those provisional costs being much higher than that gate. Good argument could be that they're entitled to both.
All right. Well, there you have it. That kind of wraps up our overview of different types of contracts and different components of contracts. But there's one big area that we have not addressed, and we're going to come back next time and talk to you about hybrid contracts. How do you tailor your contract to meet your needs and requirements? Join us again next time between two FARS.